So this video is going to look at one of the three systems for speech production. This is the sublaryngeal system, that part of the voice production system below the larynx. Um, in this part of the textbook, we see some pairing of terms right off the bat. Uh, some of the parts of this system have a normal or familiar colloquial English name and a more formal or technical name, generally derived from Latin and Greek. So the lungs can also be called the pulmones. The chest is the thorax. Windpipe is the trachea. And when you're speaking technically, as far as I'm concerned, lungs is sufficiently precise. Even though it's a familiar colloquial term, it doesn't have other meanings. It means those two organs that we're talking about when we refer to the pulmones, right? It's just easier to parse out lungs. So I encourage you to use the more familiar term when that doesn't lead to imprecision. Okay. Other parts, maybe because they aren't so apparent from the outside, we have the bronchi and bronchia and the alveoli. They don't get everyday names. They just have these fancy names. I do want to introduce a quick bit of terminology here. This whole module of the course is about physiology, not just anatomy. And a quick and incomplete way to think about that distinction is anatomy is about the parts and physiology is anatomy plus how those parts work to perform the functions that they perform in the living organism. So once we've learned about these structures, we start to learn about the forces that enable them, in this case, to draw air in and expel it. There's muscles, of course. There's the elastic recoil force, that tendency of the lungs and surrounding tissues to return to a rest position after they've been moved. And yeah, there are a variety of muscles, the diaphragm, various muscles attached to the rib cage and whatnot. Some of these contract when we want to draw air in, and others contract to push air out when needed. And I'll leave you to read the details in the textbook. As usual, this video is just meant to sort of frame the situation and maybe highlight some of the key points I want you to be conscious of that maybe the textbook doesn't highlight, or I just want to add my two bits. Right. Diving deeper into the function of this system in the textbook, we have some graphs comparing normal breathing to speech, both in terms of how quickly we take our breaths and how deeply we breathe in and out. Speech breaths tend to take longer and they have more volume, more volume at the peak and at a lower point at the other end of full exhalation. And I like seeing how these, really examining these graphs and looking at how these different types of breathing compare to each other. And then there's a lot of reference points in lung volume, the vital capacity, a rest position, and so on. There's several terms around that, all of which are relevant to understanding the different aspects of lung function as it relates to speech and as it relates to normal quiet breathing. And finally, besides supplying the how do we move the base, produce a basic flow of air that's used for most speech sounds, we also get a bit about how how the sublaryngeal system works to modulate the volume of speech. And we'll get a bit deeper into that in the next volume when we look at the laryngeal system. So in some ways, the sublaryngeal portion of the vocal tract is the least interesting in terms of speech production, right? It doesn't do a lot of different things. It's more interesting and biologically in terms of being able to breathe and do the gas transfer that is so important to us as animals. But there's actually a lot of interesting corners to our knowledge about the lungs, even just as they apply to speech. So do dig into this section, and yeah, I hope you get something useful out of it.